All right, I'd like to call this meeting of your Newark City Council order. Autumn, please call the roll.
Mr. Bub?
Here.
Mr. Cost?
Here.
Mrs. Floyd?
Here.
Mr. Frazier?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Marmee?
Present.
Mr. Rath?
Here.
Mr. Roletta?
Here.
And Mr. Blake?
Here.
We have all here or present this evening. Next, if you'll join us in the invocation by Mr. Johnson, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Let us pray. Lord, as we enter the season of giving and love, remind us of our obligations to all people, some in need, some in depression, some in poverty. May you and us be there for them, with those who are in joy and those who feel the love of the world. Be with us in our deliberations, and may we ever serve you and the people of Newark. In your name we pray. Amen.
Mr. Johnson, I'll say happy birthday and start it off. Mrs. Frazier, you want to start us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we have caucus. That's the time for council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything? Okay. Next, we have the minutes of the November 21st, 2016 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve that?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Johnson, second by Mr. Bubb. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Thank you. Next, under appointments, we have two appointments this evening. Mayor Hall reappointing Sue Spiker and Mark Motter to the Etna Corporate Park Joint Economic Development Zone 2 Board. These terms will begin immediately and expire October 19th, 2018. The mayor is not here tonight, but Mr. Motter said he would pinch hit for him if anyone has any questions. Anyone up here have any questions about those two appointments? Mr. Motter, I'm sure, would like to speak about himself if anyone has any questions. All right, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Also, the other appointment is reappointing Mark Motter to a City of Newark Tax Incentive Review Council that has a 3-year term, which will begin January 1, 2017 and expire December 31st, 2019. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That also passes. We have two reports this evening of standing committees, one from Finance and one from Service. Without objection, those will be received and filed. There's two places for comments from citizens. One is now and one is after the legislation. Basically, this is not a debate with council. This is just your opportunity to be heard. Do we have anyone that would like to speak? Just raise your hand and we'll... Anyone in this first section? Okay. Next, we'll move on to ordinances on the second reading, 16-46.
Ordinance 16-46 by Mr. Marmee, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Rath, and Mr. Johnson. An ordinance amending section 890.051 of chapter 890 of the codified ordinances for the city of Newark, Ohio regarding the levying and collection of municipal income taxes.
You've heard the second reading of 16-46. What is your wish? Ms. Hall.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Ms. Hall. Second by Mrs. Floyd. Is there any discussion on 16-46? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Bubb?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Blake?
Yes.
16-46 passes 10-0. Next we move on to resolutions on the second reading, 16-96.
Resolution 16-96 by Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, and Mr. Johnson. A resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 16-96. What is your wish?
I move that we pass.
Mr. Johnson moves.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Floyd. Is there any discussion on 16-96? I'll please call the roll vote.
Mr. Bubb?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Blake?
Yes.
16-96 passes 10-0. Next we have 16-97.
Resolution 16-97 by Mr. Marmee, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Koss, Mr. Rath, Mr. Johnson. A resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard your second reading of 16-97. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee.
I make a motion to adopt Resolution 16-97.
Motion by Mr. Marmee, second by Mrs. Floyd. Is there any discussion on 16-97? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Blake?
Yes.
16-97 passes 10-0. Next resolution is on the first reading. We have 16-98.
Resolution 1698 by Mr. Marmee, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Koss, Mr. Rath, and Mr. Johnson. A resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
16- Mr. Marmee.
Mr. President, I make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on Resolution 16-98.
Second. Motion by Mr. Marmee to waive the 2-day reading rule, second by Mrs. Floyd. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have some compensation payouts that we need to make, and we expedite those so we can get those individuals their money.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Bub? Mr. Koss?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Sorry, 2-day reading rule has been waived, Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Make a motion to adopt Resolution 16-98.
Motion by Mr. Marmee, second by Mrs. Floyd. Is there any other discussion on 16-98? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Blake?
Yes.
16-98 passes 10-0. Next on the first reading, we have 16-99.
Resolution 16-99 by Mr. Rath, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Koss, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Frazier. A resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service of the City of Newark, Ohio to negotiate and enter into contract subject to the appropriation of funds for a solar power system located at the wastewater treatment plant.
You've heard first reading of 16-99.
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Motion by Mr. Rath to waive the 2-day reading rule. Second. Second by Mr. Bub. Mr. Rath.
This is a contract that needed to get underway.
Okay. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Blake?
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Rath.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to adopt 16-99.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Rath, second by Mr. Bub. Is there any discussion on 16-99?
Ditto.
Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Blake?
Yes.
16-99 passes 10-0. And finally, this evening, we have 16-100.
Resolution 16-100 by Mr. Marmee, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Koss, Mr. Rath, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Frazier. A resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit an application to United States Environmental Protection Agency for fiscal year 2017 Brownfields Assessment Grant.
16-100.
Mr.
Mr. Marmee.
President, I make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on Resolution 16-100.
Motion by Mr. Marmee to waive the 2-day reading rule. Second by Mr. Bub. Mr. Marmee.
Yes, we are facing a deadline for this application, and we want to need it expedited in order to meet that deadline.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to adopt Resolution 16-100.
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee, second by Mr. Cost. Any discussion on 16-100? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Koss?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
And Mr. Blake?
Yes.
16-100 passes 10-0. And that concludes our legislation for this evening. Thank you for your attention. Next, we have our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Again, this is not a debate with council. This is just your opportunity to be heard. Do we have anyone? If we do, raise your hand and I'll have you come up. Ma'am in the back. Just give us your name and address for the record.
Gabriella Campbell.
I'm sorry. Wait. I'm sorry. Shouldn't have said that till you got up here.
It's Gabriella Campbell, 204 South 4th Street, Newark, Ohio, 43055. I just wanted to politely remind everyone that we will be protesting out front tomorrow at 11, in between 11 to 1, against the decision to hold state law instead of the recent city ordinance that passed for the marijuana. So I just wanted to remind everybody we will be out there.
Okay. Thank
you.
Anyone else? Sir?
I just want to make a comment that,
Name and address, please.
Sean Aber, 71 Craig Street. I called my councilwoman, but she never called me back. Sorry about that. But I'm also here about the marijuana initiative. The people we want to, with over 1,000 votes, over 1,000, over 1,200 votes, we won. If each and every one of you guys won by 1,200 votes, and they told you you're not the councilman now, what would you think? What would you guys really think about that? I mean, the people spoke to you guys. You guys decide not to listen to us? I mean, I know everybody by and large is up for re-election. I know this ain't gonna make or break any of you guys' council job. I know that for a fact. But we still, the people did speak. And just think about it, if you ran against your opponent, you won by 1,200 votes, and they tell you 2 days later, you're not the councilman. They are. That's how it is. Sorry. Thank you for your time. Thanks everybody for their time. I appreciate it. And we will be having a peaceful, completely peaceful protest. That's all tomorrow to show that we're not pleased. And that's all I got to say. And I thank you guys for hearing me out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am? We say two for one deal?
Yeah. Megan Frazier, 20 West North Street, Newark, Ohio, 43055.
I'm Taylor Finley. I'm at 7801 Dorsey Mill Road Southeast.
So we're here today on behalf of the 2012 Newark High School class. This past weekend, we recently lost a fellow classmate, Duncan Neer, died at 23. He was in Akron at the time. He was attending Akron University to get his business degree. He was in his senior year there. We're here to inform council on the loss and the desire for the community to come together at this time. So we are trying to put together on December 22nd a benefit that will be held at Newark High School in the Commons. We are going to have that go on from 3 to 9, and we're hoping to have a raffle, refreshments, and maybe t-shirts and stuff like that, just to get some money together for the family and help them with this loss, and really just to bring the community together. So this is an invite to you guys. We would love to have you guys there. It'd be great. And thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Just to add to that a second. Oh, go ahead.
where can anybody get tickets or information if they are so desire?
We're still working on that. I'll send Mark with some more information for next city council meeting. I think right now, I think we're just gonna have it so you guys can show up. I don't know if we're gonna be selling tickets for the actual benefit. I think we're just gonna sell tickets for the raffle.
You said the 22nd, right?
The 22nd.
Okay, yeah, that will be after our next council meeting, so, okay. Thank you. Just to add, this is, just if you allow me a moment, this young man, such a nice young man, was stabbed in the heart by his roommate actually, I think went through surgery okay, and then the next morning had to go back in surgery and had a blood clot or whatever, and I think passed away then on the table, wherever. But just a nice young man. What a tragedy. So thank you for bringing that up. Anyone else for citizens' comments? Okay. Anyone from the administration? I'll go all director.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll pass.
We'll be talking all. Mr. Bub.
I'll pass, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bub. Mr. Cost?
I will pass, thank you.
Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd.
I just want to say a couple things. For those of you who haven't been downtown and with 3 roundabouts done, it's wonderful. It's really very nice. Secondly, Mr. Johnson and I had the privilege last night of seeing the Newark Granville Symphony with the choirs of Newark High and Granville High. They do this every year, and it's a wonderful Christmas concert. It's nice to see that many young people out performing, and it's just a great start to the holiday season. Along with my push for the Midland, their series of shows that are coming out after the first of the year has been announced now, so you can go on the website for the Midland and see what all's coming, but there are some good things. So, and finally, Mount Vernon Road is coming close to being finished. I talked to a worker the other day who said he thought they were going to finish their work by the 16th. Now, I don't know if that means it's going to be open. They may still have to do striping and that kind of thing. I don't know, but it's another one of the series of many projects that we have going on. And in case you haven't been watching in the Advocate now, they are taking the 31 days of December and saying 31 new things that have happened in Newark this year. We've had lots of things going on this year, so many of which we've been involved in. So, and with that, I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Floyd. Mr. Frazier.
Yeah, with the loss of Duncan, it's been a rough weekend for my wife and her class, and to see the amount of fundraising that's been occurring and the amount of outpouring of support from everybody in the community has truly been inspiring, and it lets you reassess what your priorities are and how precious life really is. With that being said, I want to address the previous statements that were made about the legalization of marijuana. When it comes to an ordinance that's on the ballot, we have a state that allows anybody to put just about anything on the ballot. Whether that follows the state constitution or whether it's even applicable is not really up to the voters. And so what we see here is, should marijuana laws be reassessed? Was something accomplished in the last election? We repealed the local ordinances that had increased penalties and increased fines that were associated to it. We went to the state level. The issue that you currently have is the state needs to reassess the criminalization aspect of the law. It requires an additional referendum, a more sweeping referendum, and because of the way that the state law is set up and the municipality is set up, it's a lot different than the federal government with the states. So because it's uniformly enforced throughout the state, and because we are set up to be subservient to the state, we cannot change the way that we follow the law in the city of Newark, Ohio. And we apologize for that. But we also encourage you to have a more sweeping referendum in order to get your views heard and a progressive treatment of marijuana in the city and the state of Ohio. And so we do hear you, but we also are constrained by the Constitution of the state of Ohio. And although that you did change the ordinances for the local city of Newark, Ohio, you did not change the Constitution of the state of Ohio. And I feel like the law director and the chief of police are following the law, and we do not want selective enforcement of the law, because that is a slippery slope where people's rights can be trampled upon. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Ms. Lott?
Thank you. I agree with that. I did discuss this with Sean, and I agree with everything you said. I spoke with the law director's office as well. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Johnson?
I want to thank Mr. Floyd we had a wonderful time at the concert. It was really absolutely beautiful. And I want to thank all those who wished me a happy birthday. And I'm so pleased to be here.
We're glad you're here too.
And in case you didn't know, it was my 80th birthday. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Does your wife know that you and Mrs. Floyd had this good time, or was it?
Yes.
She was there.
She was there too. Mr. Marmee?
Thank you, Mr. President. I need to call a Finance Committee meeting. Curtis, I want to extend a happy birthday to you, and I did that through Facebook. You're supposed to like those things.
I did.
Just like them. Okay.
I saw that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that.
My thoughts and prayers go out to the engineer family. I grew up with the boys and didn't know the sons as well, but I knew of them and everything, and they were around when my children were younger. Duncan was the same age as my daughter, so my thoughts and prayers go out to that family. I do want to mention some of my viewpoints on the marijuana initiative. It's an administrative issue that is being dealt with. We're the legislative body of the three bodies. It is up to the enforcement portions to enforce the laws, how they choose and how they see fit, and what is best. Whether we make a law or anything along those lines, it is their decision on how best to enforce that for the citizens of the municipality, whether it be the city, the state, or whatever entity. In this situation, there's a lot of different factors that go into the decisions as far as why the choice is being made to operate under the state. Fiscally, it's a huge issue if we operate as far as under our municipality code versus the state. So it really does not benefit the city. And again, it is a choice, and as Mr. Frazier indicated, if you really want to change the law, then it's a state law that needs to be changed. The other thing that's in play, with the stiffer penalties, you can afford to do some of the things that you're wanting that have to be done, even at the minimum level. And so there becomes a cost factor, and that's the reason why the city of Newark had the stiffer penalties, is because then it would be able to afford the entire program. Okay. Let's see. And then finally, I can't go without saying that I do have something to do on New Year's Eve this year, where normally I do not do much. And I'm sure that we'll have discussions, and win or lose, I'm just happy we're there. And I know that there was a lot of folks, as far as the Ohio State folks, that thought it was pretty dismal when we lost to Penn State. However, they persevered, they continued on with their quest, and I'm proud of the team for doing that. And just as the law director is probably proud of his team for where they're at, and it will be a friendly rivalry, and we're looking forward to that game. It should be very exciting. That'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Mr. Rath?
Thank you. I'll call the service committee meeting and I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Mr. Lett? Thank you, I'll pass. And Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll pass.
Okay. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Our next committee meeting will be next Monday, the 12th at 5:30. And unless something comes up, our final council meeting of the year will be December 19th here in this room. Thank you for coming. We appreciate your attendance. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Rath, second by Mr. Johnson. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Same sign. We're adjourned.